Death Note, written by Tsugumi Oba and illustrated by Takeshi Obata, was a one-of-a-kind horror mystery manga published under the Shonen Jump magazine from December 2003 to May 2006, and, on October 4th, 2006, received its first fully animated episode of its own anime series that ran until June 2007. The story resonated with people for its way of showcasing the protagonist, Light Yagami, as a maniacal, twisted, and irredeemable character with a god complex, who considers it his duty to act out God's will unto the world utilizing the titular Death Note, which grants the ability to anonymously end the life of whoever's name is written within the note however the user sees fit. With 108 chapters of the manga and 37 episodes of the anime, the series remains a cult classic, and is praised for its clever writing and loopholes to its own established rules, and creates real suspense while adding a looming question of morality at the same time. Its legacy stands among the public as an incredibly layered story with even more layered characters, and even The Simpsons parodied it, for some reason. That's cool. Now, the series in its entirety can be viewed on Netflix, which, coincidentally enough, is the same company that produced and published a feature-length film under the same name 11 years after the anime's initial release in 2006. The film starred Nat Wolff, Lakeith Stanfield, Margaret Qualley, and Willem Dafoe, to name a few, and it was met with significantly less positivity than its predecessor, with main complaints being the butchering of characters, the unnecessary nature of its existence, and overall watered-down narrative compared to the original, which was held in such a high regard. And after watching both versions back-to-back, yeah, I can't help but agree. I've had pages upon pages of notes while watching the original Death Note under the assumption the movie would follow similar story beats, but the movie follows none of them, and my notes are pointless. I like to shed some light on these differences, and how a movie like this could still be made while existing within the rules of Death Note, but not actively seem insulting to its source material. I'll be going over the main characters, important scenes, and overall what made the original work, and what the movie failed to deliver on. Before we delve into each character, I just want to touch on the actual visuals and the iconography from each version of the same story, starting with some of the techniques used in each. While animation is a large difference from real film studios and sets, they both follow a similar set of rules that can be followed in order to tell a cohesive story. Neither one should break axis, they should follow eye lines, should have establishing shots, should understand where the light is coming from, understand the space they're in, etc, etc. There are scenes in the anime that have striking visuals that understand the lighting perfectly, such as the scene where Light and Misa first meet in his room, or where Misa and Kiyomi are at dinner, which does not pass the Bechdel test whatsoever.
She knows that I can't see him that much, while she can be with him all the time. How dare she?
The use of color in the show is a very tasteful and talented way to show dull and dreary scenes, similar to how when characters have their own inner monologues, they're often accompanied by a color. Even details such as the roundness of Light's eyes when he loses the memories of the Death Note versus their sharpness when he regains them. There's so many small details that one can get away with animation that simply aren't easy to achieve with real filmmaking. Similarly, how there are things that one can get away with in film that cannot be done through animation. It just further begs the question why the film needed to be made to begin with, since the original didn't need to be touched. So many emblems, crests, and visual things within its world that just can't be replicated. Death Note isn't shy from its religious symbolism either. Light openly claims a lot about his desire to be god of the new world, and we open with him reading a passage from his textbook in relation to God. The kanji of his name, when separated, translate roughly to night, god, and moon, as if directly relating to a dark god of sorts. Ryuk's obsession with apples can be attributed to the forbidden fruit of Adam and Eve, and Ryuk's desire to eat them all the time can be correlated to the Bible's story, repeated rule of not eating said fruit, showcasing how corrupted these characters are. Light and Misa can even be considered Adam and Eve to an extent, and the forbidden fruit in this case can be the Death Note. Since its existence they grow so fond of becomes their ultimate downfall. And the most obvious symbolism is towards L's demise. He stands out in the rain, saying how he can hear church bells ringing, knowing his time was coming. Once inside, L cleans Light's feet off with a towel, directly paralleling when Jesus would wash the feet of Judas the day before he was crucified, knowing Judas had betrayed him, but still treating him with utmost respect. Just like how L knew that Light had lied to him all along, but was powerless to do anything, since he knew that Rem would soon have his name written in her Death Note. All of this crafted symbolism, whether far-fetched or not, isn't touched on slightly in the movie, and further cements the idea in that, in comparison, the anime cared far more deeper about its story than the movie ever really tried to. Now let's talk about the differences of characters between the film and the anime. Starting with Ryuk, since he essentially is the mascot for the entire series. The filmmakers knew this since Ryuk's design is, for the most part, unchanged. They replace his feathers with spikes, but for the most part he looks intact. At first glance, having Willem Dafoe play the Shinigami sounded silly and insane, but his performance really does carry Ryuk's apathetic and uncaring nature, while still carrying his sense of intimidation.
Did you kill those FBI agents?
What do you think?
In the original, Ryuk's reasoning for dropping the Death Note came down to simply one thing. He was bored. and was looking for some excitement in his eternity of the empty, void Shinigami realm. Light come across the note, which we'll touch on later, and he carries out his will. The anime makes it a point that Ryuk is nothing more than a spectator, and not to urge Light to make any decisions one way or another, which leads his character to become less and less important as the series goes on, and eventually he kind of just becomes a background gag character. But since he's written from the start to be just a spectator, this kind of lends itself to Ryuk being less of a factor, since the existence of a Shinigami in itself is enough spectacle. He doesn't need to do anything more. While the film takes on a much different approach, it makes Ryuk seem ultimately evil, just because he looks like he is. His entrance is far more grand, and he urges Light to kill a bully instantly. There's a part that feels like a Chekhov's gun that says never to trust Ryuk, written in what is assumed to be a previous holder of the note, but that never gets addressed. The same can be said when Ryuk says no one has been able to write all 4 letters of his name, but only 2, which even of itself is a lie because we saw his name in there, but anyway. It feels like they're gonna lead up to something with that, but they just don't. This seemingly important detail doesn't lead to anything. Rather than Ryuk being a spectator who was bored, the film makes him out to be an evil force, prodding Light to make certain choices and actions. The anime ends with Ryuk saying that their time together has been fun, but Light has become pathetic since he lost. So Ryuk is ultimately the one to write Kira's name in the Death Note, ending Light in a very poetic way. Knowing that he's always had the power to kill Kira, but he didn't since he was entertained, as Light is finally killed off by a god of death, which is something he tried to be.
It was good while it lasted. We eased each other's boredom for quite a while.
There's a somberness to the scene, since Ryuk is just a silly character who eats apples for most part, but now he's serious, he's cold, and conclusive. Despite his appearance, Ryuk is never a force of good or evil. He's a Shinigami. He does what he does and harbors no love nor resentment for anyone.
Certain events made me develop feelings for her.
Feelings? But you're a Shinigami.
He's a perfect middle ground that just does what he wants and goes away. But in the movie, Ryuk is far less neutral and is actively interfering with Light's affairs, making Light's choices seem less impactful, which starts our trend of the movie changing characters' behaviors one by one. While the movie doesn't really have any character named Misa explicitly in it, Light does have a love interest because of course he does. This is a westernized version of Japanese media. And like any western media taking place in a high school, our protagonist is doing all he can to swoon the attractive cheerleader Mia. Thrilling. Compare that to how Light and Misa are introduced in the anime. Misa is obsessed with Kira because he killed the man who murdered her parents. She worships him, idolizes Kira, and once she tracks down his identity using her Shinigami eyes, which is something that is never mentioned once in the movie, she stalks and tracks Light down so that they can begin their courtship. Misa is just as twisted as Light is, however her obsession is with Light himself rather than becoming God, and she'll do anything he says without fail. However, unlike Light, you almost have to feel sorry for her. Light is nothing short of abusive, manipulating, and awful to her, yet she stands by him through anything.
You look kind of...
Misa, just shut up and do what I told you, alright?
When they lose their memories of the note, Misa is helpful in the Kira case. She takes risks and is incredibly helpful, but she's just blinded, obsessed by what she thinks is love, and at the end is left grieving for someone who shouldn't be grieved. And then we compare that to Mia in the film. They met because Light thinks she's hot and he stood up to bullies for her in the rain and got beat up. Nothing in that sentence was a unique idea. Arguably, she's even more evil than Light in the movie. She's not afraid to kill his dad without question and is always pushing the envelope of who should die and who should live. She's crafty and turns Kira into 2 people instead of just 1. Even putting Light's own name in the note so she could take over as Kira for herself. On one hand, giving the female counterpart a more pronounced role is great, as cultural views of women in Japanese media can be a little disappointing, to say the least, but making her this awful throws into question who is the antagonist of the film. Giving Light the ability to be seen as the one to root for goes against everything about Death Note, and in my opinion, giving Misa the role of incredibly attractive, unwavering support character makes us want to see Light ultimately fail even more, and his pattern of abusing her for his own gain makes him that much more detestable, which is the main point of the series. You are not supposed to like Light at all, but let's save that for his own section.
This is the first time in my life that I've been provoked to hit a woman.
L, or Ryuzaki, or Laliet, is one half of the most integral duo in the entire series. L is what I can only describe as a once-in-a-lifetime character. We're first introduced to L as a letter on a screen with an altered voice to hide his identity. He's spoken of as the best detective on Earth, solving seemingly impossible cases, going to any lengths to solve any case. He works in the shadows, and his name is just a simple initial. Then, as we progress, L's face is known and shown to the police force, and he's unassuming to say the least. He sits strange, he holds paper strange, holds phone strange, he dresses shabby, never wears shoes or socks, and has an affinity of consuming various snacks and candies candidly as he does his work solving the Kira case. In his first move, he pinpoints that Kira is Japanese in the district he resides in by simply broadcasting someone Kira kills only in that area. The top 3 detectives aside from L are just aliases he created to further bury his own identity. He's a perfect foil to Light, someone who is just as cunning as him, but willing to go to extreme measures all while hiding his own identity through a letter. He's meant to be ambiguous at all times in terms of age and ethnicity. He passes off for a college student, yet can pilot a helicopter with ease. He's Japanese Japanese, but also had an upbringing in Britain, and as much as L is a perfect foil for Light, he also develops a fondness for him, because under his surface, L is a very lonesome, depressed individual. He goes on record saying that Light has been his only friend, despite keeping him, his girlfriend, and his father in custody for months with no connection to the outside world, and after that continued his suspicion to the point where he decided to strap himself to Light at all times, and through all of that, he can't help but respect and commend Light for his mind, making the relationship that much more tragic.
Either we lose and both die together, or we successfully catch Kira. Which is it?
We catch Kira! I would never dream about living in a world without Light.
Yes, that would be dark.
Now, let's couple that with the L depicted in the film, which is played by Lakeith Stanfield. The performance of the character, in honesty, isn't nearly my issue with it. Stanfield carries the same confidence in himself that L has, however far more upfront rather than subdued and quiet.
I wonder if it was a difficult decision.
What was difficult decision?
Sparing your father's life.
He sits like L, he moves like L, and on the surface acts similarly. However, it's how the character is written is where the two stray far from one another. While L in the anime is soft-spoken by Alessandro Giuliani, he's methodical, calculated, and he's certain. The movie's depiction of the character seems incredibly irrational, emotional, and brash. Once Watari is killed in the movie, L loses all self-control and barges into Light's home, demands answers, and chases him with a gun. He's far more prone to showing his face, rather than having the police force come to see him in a location of his choosing. He goes to see them. This makes L as a character seem far less like someone who's trying to solve a case by any means necessary, and is more like someone trying to settle a score or prove a point, and even at times as if he's the antagonist of the film, giving chase to our main character with a weapon, which goes against all character traits these two are meant to follow, once again falling into this trend of traditional westernized media. In the show, L only loses control of himself once, when he discovers that Shinigami may exist, and his reaction is all the more shocking, seeing someone so collected lose his composure and reflect exactly how he would die later on. Which is another point. L's death is a pivotal moment in the show, with real weight and consequence, leading to his successors Nier and Mello to take over the Kira case in their own ways, showing Light that no matter what, L would always loom over him until his undoing. You really felt something when L died in the anime. It felt unfair, as his deductions were always 100% correct, but Light continued to bend the rules that L had no idea existed. But rather, the movie makes it feel like Light simply outran L, rather than outsmart him, making his victory over L feel less deserved or even impactful. And L doesn't die in the movie. Light Yagami is an evil genius, hell-bent on becoming the god of a world where he is judge, jury, and executioner, utilizing the rules of the Death Note to his advantage at every turn, manipulating a god of death to their own demise, while at the same time killing a man without an identity who was the only man on Earth who could take him down. He purposely threw himself in jail, lost all memories of his Death Note, played a half-year-long game to eventually touch the note once more and retain all of his memories, all just to prove his innocence while continuing his work as Kira. He rigged an explosive device in his own room so that if anyone came into contact with the note other than himself, his own house would burn down. He constructed a 3-layered security system to know if his bedroom door had been open. He was willing to end his own sister's life to continue his work as Kira, and continued to play innocent when his father died, which ultimately was Light's own doing. Light Turner is a high school student from San Francisco who wants to sleep with the head cheerleader. His actions are not for himself, but to impress her, and is constantly pushed around by her and Ryuk to make choices that Light Yagami would think are so beneath him. In the anime, Light uses the note to test and see if it's real, writing the name of a criminal he just saw on TV, and is shocked when it works. In the movie, Ryuk essentially forces Light to write the name of a bully outside a window. A high school bully. Light is constantly unable to make decisions for himself and is always playing second fiddle to another character. The anime makes it so that Light is given the name Kira by devout followers who align themselves with his politics, making him seem like more of an urban legend that the public gave a name to. The movie, Light names himself Kira, making it much more embarrassing. The film tries to portray Light as the protagonist somehow, because in American media the idea of a main character being the bad guy is unheard of, and when it's done properly, it's usually a story that takes itself carefully and seriously and isn't a Netflix-produced movie banking on previous IPs. Things that are supporting my hypothesis that this film was trying to make Light into a quote-unquote likable protagonist is, again, the aforementioned being chased by L with a gun. The first proper kill that Light commits is being an act of vengeance for his dead mother, which has created tension up until now between him and his father. A story arc that's unique to the film and an act that one can view, albeit with grey morality, something reasonable, as opposed to the blind murder of criminals regardless of his personal connection to them. And once again is the scene where Mia says she wrote his name in his own Death Note, leading to the climax where the two fall from a Ferris wheel. And then as well as the final moments where Light doesn't end up dying or getting caught at all, unlike the anime's most iconic moment for some reason, but rather he ends up alive in a hospital bed where he says with his mouth to his police chief father his mental strategy for getting away with it all in the final scene. He just lays it all out to his dad, who's a cop. It's a weird moment where you kind of watch it and you feel like, wow, yeah, he really did it, but you should never feel that way for this character. Nothing about these two characters are similar other than their names. As opposed to Elle, who had similar mannerisms and mostly similar attitudes, Light Turner resembles nothing of Light Yagami, and the latter of which could find thousands of ways to outclass the former, which shouldn't be possible for a character attempting to reflect the other one. To close the video off, I wanted to share my own thoughts on how the movie could still exist exactly the way it is, but with minor changes. The attempt is to tell another story within the Death Note universe, but separate it from its source material enough to have both versions exist in their own vacuums. For starters, Ryuk at the end of the anime lives on, and after time, it's possible that he'd get bored again. So he could just drop his Death Note in the human world once more, but this time in San Francisco instead of Japan. And that's where Light Turner would pick up the Death Note. But his name in this hypothetical would be changed to avoid confusion and be an entirely different character. This could explain how vastly different the two are. Ryuk, now slightly more jaded after his encounters with Light Yagami in the past, could crave that same bloodlust and push Turner to use the note a little more recklessly for his own amusement, trying to recapture the thrill of Light Yagami. And this could explain why Ryuk is more imposing and meddling in the film. Everything else could be the exact same. Turner and Mia could take up the moniker Kira, referring to themselves as the reincarnation of the urban legend from years past, and everything else could be the same. And as for Elle, rather than pass him off as the same character from the anime, this could be another one of Elle's successors from the Wami House. And for context, the Wami House is an institution Elle, along with several other orphan children, were raised to be groomed to be the world's best detectives. It's where Elle and his successors Nier and Mello, the two ultimately responsible for catching Kira, were all taught. It's entirely possible to have more characters raised within this institution, and Lakeith Stanfield's character in the movie could well be another one of these gifted children, which would explain these characters' differences as well. Watary's death in the movie would be motivating this outbreak, and given our hypothetical continuation from the original anime would require retconning Watary's death in the anime, but for the sake of changing as little as possible, I feel like that could be acceptable. All of these minuscule changes I feel would justify these drastic changes in character motivation, and could even justify another piece of media from this franchise. Because as it currently stands, the film is a failed promise of retelling an animated story in a real-world film setting. It falls flat on delivering any of what made the original Death Note so great, and is just changing characters left and right, and just doesn't make sense. But by simply changing some characters' names and their backgrounds, we can recontextualize the story the film is trying to tell, and at the very least make it palatable, rather than a blatant misrepresentation of what it's trying so hard to be. But I hope me sharing my opinions as transparent as I am doesn't make my name end up in any cursed notebooks or anything by any bitter Netflix producers.